Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Jarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so we had, kind of a big game last week or earlier this week, right? You had Mavs Lakers, right? This was Luka's first game against the Dallas Mavericks since obviously, the big blockbuster trade that sent him to LA and Anthony Davis to Dallas. Obviously, Anthony Davis didn't play, right? He's obviously been sidelined with the groin injury, but Luka played, and the stat line, the shooting wasn't great, 6 for 17 from the field, 1 of 7 from 3, 19 points, but he did have 12 assists. He had 15 rebounds, 3 steals, 2 blocks. You could tell early in the game he tried to kind of stick it to his old team, right? And then kind of after that point from there on out, right, it was kind of a win by committee game, right? LeBron had a big fourth quarter right after being pretty quiet for most of the game. The starters pretty much all played pretty well, right? I mean, Rui had a really good game, Austin had a good game, and things like that. But you kind of look around, and again, where they've been able to win a lot of these games as of late has also been on the defensive end, right? I mean, they held the Mavs to under 100 points, 99 points. Obviously, it was a shorthanded Mavs team, right? Kyrie Irving was there, Clay and Max Christie, but obviously no Anthony Davis and the other centers didn't play. But for the Lakers, that's really what's been, what has fueled their turnaround this season is the fact that, they had that stretch early-ish December, right? And even a little before that, right? Where they couldn't stop anybody, right? Where they just were kind of just giving up points left and right to anyone and everyone. And they were losing a lot of games that way, right? But then over the last couple of months, right, they have locked in on the defensive end where they've been over the last 20-ish games. They've been, the number one defense in the league, right? Now, are they actually the best defense in the NBA? Probably not. But, you can kind of see even without a traditional, big physical option at the 5, they still have a lot of size at the other positions, right? All their forwards are relatively big with length. They are really good now at being able to switch and being able to play small. The return of guys like Jared Vanderbilt, right? Gabe Vincent, right? Even though he didn't shoot well in this game, right? He's had a much better season and more impactful season than last year, right? Where he also didn't even really play. But it's kind of funny, right? Because over the last stretch of several games, they've kind of played at the level of, they're not going to be favorites, to get out of the West or win the title, but they've played at the level where they seem like a legit, contender, right? Like, not that you're picking them to win the title, but they seem like they're in the upper tier of these NBA teams where, now they're kind of in a race to try to win as many games as they can because, obviously you look below after once you get to the 6th spot, it's really jammed up in there and it's jammed up there above them too. So there's, a world where if they continue to play well, they're 8-2 in their last 10, they could get, to the top 3. It's just going to be really tough because they're going to have to leapfrog some of these other teams, and their schedule is very difficult, including a stretch in March where they have 3 straight back-to-back, 6 games in 8 days, all against pretty tough matchups. Now, some of the other teams have tough-ish schedules as well, but if they can get ahead of 5, right, that would be a pretty good spot to be in, right? Because then, let's say if you're, I don't know, 3, right, then you probably avoid OKC until maybe the conference finals, right? We'll see if they can match up well against a team like Denver in the second round. But, OKC is kind of the monster team, at least right now, that, seems to be the best out of the lot. But, the more you continue to kind of go across, and we can talk about the other Western Conference teams as we go, the more the season goes on, the more I'm still sticking with OKC, but the more I get kind of worried about it now because it feels like the West now has gotten better with the way, that teams like, Golden State have been playing, right? Steph just had basically almost a 60-point game right before we got on, right? Where that team has been significantly better as of late, playing their best basketball. And even the other teams, around them, like Minnesota, right? Once they get their guys back, maybe we'll be better. We'll see what the Randall thing looks like. Dallas when AD comes back. But just as a whole, right, this Lakers team, I think the key thing in this game was obviously Luka didn't have a crazy night, but just in general, you feel a lot better about this team than you did a few months ago. And also, like with LeBron, he's now back to playing like a top, 10 guy again, right? Where he wasn't looking like that, earlier in the season, because mainly on the defensive end, right? But now when you watch him every night, even before the Luka trade, right, he was much better defensively, and his offense has been pretty consistent anyways. It's just now that you have another guy in Luka, right, who can run and create your own offense, plus Austin Reeves as a third guy too, who's kind of figured a lot of stuff out where this is the best basketball he's played. Now you have the ability for him to not necessarily have to play on the ball every possession. And he knows how to play off the ball anyways, because we've seen him do it before. So now you have, I think, probably at this point in his career, a more ideal version of what you want, where he's not necessarily always on the ball. And now you can see, and now he's able to access the other parts of his game more consistently, the rebounding, the defense and everything like that. He's obviously a very smart basketball player. So now this feels like a much more dangerous team, even obviously without being able to acquire the center at the deadline, but they do look a lot better. Right? They do look like a legit team because, again, they've been one of the best teams on both ends of the floor for a solid couple months now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of positive takeaways from this game for the Lakers. I think you do have to start obviously with Luka Doncic. Obviously, he didn't have an efficient game, but he still put up a triple double in his revenge game or whatever. And the main takeaway that I kind of had was how LeBron and Luka look together. I think seeing LeBron play off the ball at such an efficient rate, I think really felt good. And I'm not even a Laker fan, so to see that kind of made me a little scared, right? In terms of, what does that look like in the playoffs? And since all these guys can really play off the ball, since Luka does have the ball in his hands so much, I think that does really raise the ceiling of the team because I think at any moment, a guy can really just go off, honestly. And you have the defensive personnel to surround, or you have some of the defensive personnel, especially like Finney Smith, Vando. Like those are pretty elite defenders. They're wing stoppers. They can pretty much, take anybody out of the game. And I think that's the cool part. They're so versatile. Like a guy like Vando can guard like 1 through 4. So you can't hate it at all. And then also having a Swiss Army knife like Rui Hachimura, that's pretty cool where he can slot in anywhere offensively. He can either be a stretch, he can either play, the mid range, whatever you want him to do. So I think you do have some tools that I think position you to make a deep playoff run because obviously it starts at the top. You do have Luka and LeBron. And I think the other, pieces I hope will elevate come playoff time. I think we all love what Austin Reeves has been doing, since Luka's gotten here. It's been pretty cool to see him, do things offensively and defensively as well. Dalton Connect as well. I think he put up some solid buckets at times, but overall, I think the energy of this team has shifted. You could definitely feel that something big is coming. Maybe not in this season, but down the line, I think we're going to be probably talking about this team for a long time. Obviously, people talk about the Lakers, good or bad, but I think this is going to be like a serious contender. Come playoff time. That's just from what I've seen. Like the chemistry is there. JJ Redick seems to have really meshed well. Like I didn't expect the Luka fit to be so. I guess the word is seamless. Like it's had its fair share of lows, but those lows haven't really resulted in any W's where I kind of was scratching my head like, what the heck is this fit? X, Y, and Z. It was more so Luka hasn't played ball in a while. We're just kind of waiting for him to heat up, and I think we're getting closer and closer, to see, what's going on with that. But what did you make of all the drama, surrounding the whole thing? Like, talking about Luka drinking beers and the hookah and stuff, and it's funny that stuff came out after the Mavs lost and the guy dropped a triple double, an inefficient triple double, but it's still a triple double.
Yeah, it's just bizarre at this point because it feels like that they're continuing to try to justify the decision. And, I think you're just not going to get more people to come over to that circle. And again, maybe there's a scenario where, Luka kind of just taps out after a few seasons and then, all that negative stuff, quote unquote, rears its ugly head. But is that likely? Like, probably not, right? I mean, like, just considering all the stuff that's come out, you would think the more likely scenario is it continues to kind of give him a chip on his shoulder and give him incentive to do even more than what he's already done. And he's already, there with LeBron. They've already had articles about, Luka's family interacting and seeing LeBron do all his pregame workouts, right? And how they amazed they were by that. Because if you've ever seen them, like it's a doozy. But
Yeah.
just in general, it just it's just so odd. But again, I think the fact of the matter is that they knew and understood that there was always going to be a negative level of reception when it happened, just because this is something that doesn't happen. It'd be one thing if Luca was like 30 plus
Mm-hmm.
and it hadn't worked for a while and it was just kind of probably time to move on, but he's 25 and that just doesn't normally happen, right? And obviously we can talk about Philly later, right? But like if it was something like that, okay, maybe, but they just got to the finals a year ago, right? When pretty much almost no one had them making the finals at all in the first place, right? Certainly not at the going into the season. And then even with the way they played, at best they were looked at as like a dark horse. They weren't looked at as this team is going to make the finals, right? There were teams that were ahead of them. But just kind of a funny situation, right? At the arena, of course, they had the thank you, Nico chants, right? They had the AD video too. So a lot of stuff going on there. And, again, the Mavs, when they get healthy, like they could still be a pretty good team. It's just the problem is that, they have to they're starting to slip where they're starting to lose some of these games. Like they got blown out by the Warriors right before they played the Lakers, and then they lost to the Lakers in a tough game. And, you're still going to have to wait a little bit before AD comes back, right? And then, once he comes back, what does their record look like? Because they're basically, I mean, of course, only one more loss than the 7 and 8 seeds. But again, the help isn't coming anytime soon. So they're going to have to find a way to hang on and steal some more wins until Anthony Davis and Gafford come back, just because of the fact that, these other teams are just right now playing much better basketball, right? Like the
Yeah.
Warriors are 7-3 or 8-2 or whatever in their last 10, right? So we know that they're pretty much at this point poised to make a run, right? Because they've been playing consistently better basketball. But, you know, it's a tough situation for the Mavs. And again, like you feel for the fans because that was their guy, that was their franchise player, that they were hoping that they were going to have for a long time, and now he's gone, and their future is probably going to be a little bit bleaker now, right? They're still going to be good, but now they're building around two stars that are a little bit older. We'll see if maybe they make some big move in the summer. I don't know. Maybe they go out and get, Kevin Durant like they thought at the deadline. Who knows? But just as a whole, it's a tough situation, right? Because we were thinking earlier before the deal, right? The idea of, all right, once Luka comes back, maybe they can kind of salvage the second half of the season and then maybe make a late run like last year. But now it's an entirely different team. But when they're healthy, I do like the look. It's just again they haven't been healthy all season, even before this deal. So
Yeah.
I think that you got to knock them down into the lower tier now, where they were like a championship level contender. And now they're probably like a tier below that, where it's more so probably like a dangerous team that could be scary for some of the, like, if you're Memphis or, OKC, I'm not saying that Dallas would win, but it would probably be, a tough series because of the size, the level of physicality. And there's a world where like AD could be the best player on the floor again in either of those matchups, right?
Yeah.
Like it's, especially the Memphis matchup with the way, the Jaw's kind of been up and down, and, he could outplay like a Jaren Jackson Jr. So that's kind of how you look at it. It's just then Kyrie's your lone perimeter guy. So how does that look in the playoffs, right? Because he played pretty well till the Boston series when they had all those guys that could throw at him. So
Mm-hmm.
it's continues to be a very strange situation. I just don't feel like at this point that like there's no point in trying to justify it because nobody's gonna feel any differently than they already have, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like now with all the injuries, I feel like a lot of Mavs fans are probably feeling worse by the day, even if they still like the look of the team.
100%. Yeah. It's just been crazy. It feels like assassination of character, but to the on-court stuff, I think you look at the Lakers as a legit threat, especially considering I know some people don't really take the regular season into account, but the fact that they were able to somewhat figure out what the heck to do against the Nuggets, I think that's a bigger deal than a lot of people are kind of just brushing it off, you know what I mean? So cuz that's a potential playoff matchup. So if they
Yeah,
can do
and
that in a 7-game series, then I think we might be in for a deep run for the Lakers.
Yeah, and then you also factor in even before the Luka trade, they were winning, at a
Yeah.
really good rate. We were taught, because and that was when AD was on the team, right? Where we were
Hmm.
kind of thinking, okay, maybe they go out and get a center, or maybe they go out and do something, to kind of add to the group of this team and maybe make a push. And then
Yeah.
obviously they make the Luka deal. They were thinking about getting Mark Williams, and then they decided against it, which was probably the right move given, you know, he just hasn't really done much as of late. I think he's been kind of in and out of the lineup with different things. And all, I mean, Charlotte's been just like a weird situation, but either way, just yeah, it's just kind of a funny scenario now where, a couple of teams going into the season that we were relatively low on. I mean, we thought the Lakers regular season could be good, but like we weren't high on them as like a championship level team,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now you feel a lot better about them. And then the Warriors we thought were pretty much dead,
Yeah. I thought
right?
they were
Now they're
cooked.
in their last 10. They've won 5 in a row, right? They've only lost one game since the Jimmy Butler trade. Now Steph is back to playing like a top 10 player, right? Again, including right before we got on a 56-point game, right? Where 12 threes, right? So that's one of his best. Yeah, that's his best game this season, and he's had most of his best games as of late, right? And this was a game where most of the guys on the Warriors honestly played pretty terrible, right? But he was able, and they were getting blown out in the first half, and then in the second half they ended up, winning. It ended up getting close, but they were able to get it done, and it's just the Butler trade now has completely changed life for them, and their situation is different from the Lakers because they didn't have as many big holes as they needed to fill because we talked about like their role player rotation was pretty set. They just needed a second guy.
Hmm.
Um, and now they have that. So now I guess with the Warriors, would we lump them in there too? Because, at the very least, worst case scenario, now they're definitely a wild card, dark horse team. You know how we've done those dark horse
Hmm.
groupings the last couple of years, right? And now worst case scenario, they're in that conversation.
Yeah, I think you have to group them in there, with the Lakers in terms of that kind of tier of a team to be watching in the playoffs because I think, they will probably end up leapfrogging the Clippers as the way that the way that they've been playing, has been really good. Um
Mhm.
and yeah, I could
Easy schedule.
definitely yeah, exactly. I could definitely see, you know, them holding on to the sixth spot because as long as they avoid the play-in, oh yeah, then that's probably the spoiler team right there. Depending on who they play, um, because we already know what Jimmy does in the playoffs. He tends to elevate when healthy,
Mhm.
and we already know what Stephen Curry is capable of as well. And I think that's the key to success there because we all knew what the problem with the roster was. We all wanted them to go out and get a star. They had been talking about that for years, and they didn't do that. They kind of were going with, a bunch of role players, a handful of guys that they thought could make great contributions. Granted, they were at the beginning of the season,
Mhm.
but that tapered off. And I think you really saw, okay, well, Steph is having somewhat of a down year, but that's because you're relying on him 100% of the time and hoping that these role players can get something off. But now you bring in Jimmy Butler. He's making plays on both ends of the floor, giving Steph, that release of pressure that we already were talking about going into the season, which is why we were low on them. We didn't see the Jimmy Butler trade, coming from the jump, but, it makes sense why that they're moving like they are in terms of the standings and the win streaks and stuff like that because you've completely changed the system and the way that teams have to game plan for you. Before it was okay, we just have to worry about Steph and an occasional role player if they get hot, but now you do have to worry about two stars that are really really freaking good.
Yeah, and now that makes the role players' jobs easier because some, like you said, after their play tapered off, a lot of the role players were struggling, right? To the point where it seemed like a lot of their fans were like, we got to get rid of some of these guys.
Yeah.
But now that Jimmy's in the mix, now those guys are playing better. Even guys that we didn't really see at the beginning of the season, right? All of a sudden, Quentin Post, a rookie, right, comes out of nowhere and he basically ends up kind of playing the role that I guess like a Vucevic would have played, right? Where
Right.
people were like, why didn't they go get Vucevic? And, not that his body of work is way more significant. But just the fact that now you have another type of big that can kind of come in there and mix things up and give you a different look, right? Because they hadn't had a stretch big in the way that, say, Trace Jackson Davis last year, they didn't have a lob threat, right? He's not really part of the rotation anymore, although I think he's been sick the last few games. But either way, he had kind of fallen out of favor rotationally because it seems like now they want to start with Draymond at the 5 and then have, Looney or Post, as the second or third big, whatever, right? So that way they can have a different look for different parts of the game, right?
Yeah.
And also Kaminga eventually will be back, and that's going to be interesting to see how he fits in because before his injury, he had started to play well, but at that point, he was starting to be like the second go-to scorer, even though he was coming off the bench. But now he has to kind of go back to adjusting to being another guy in the realm of the offense. But now he's a third or fourth option there, right? Which is a lot different now, right? So now that I don't think there's as much pressure on him. And now that he's not getting traded, at least for the rest of this season, he can kind of play free. And that gives them another athletic guy that can touch the paint. So that's where, I think, like I said, this team is going to be way more dangerous than I think we thought. I guess my question would be, say the top 3 seeds are what they are right now, which team is the team that would want to least face them?
Hmm.
So,
That's a
so
good question.
OKC, Memphis, Denver.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question.
Assuming they're in the 6, 7, 8 spot, right? Because I
Yeah,
think it'd be a tough ask for them to climb above 6, only
yeah,
just
I don't
because
see
there's
that happening.
5 more losses. Not that it's impossible, but maybe Houston they can catch, but Houston's starting to get healthy now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd kind of have to look at Memphis probably,
Mhm.
um, just because I think there are some volatile parts of that roster that we don't really know about. I think the inexperience might show a little bit. But then again, you could really say that about Oklahoma City as well. So I would probably say Oklahoma City and Memphis are probably the 2 teams where it's like, okay, we don't want to go up against a former champion, especially at this point, where he's hot, the team is hot, and now they've given him Jimmy Butler, and he's kind of free to do whatever the heck he wants because you have to pay attention to Jimmy as well. So I think those 2 teams I'm kind of looking at where they might get a little scared of that. I don't think Denver would be too scared of that just because they've been in a situation like that before.
Mhm.
And I think they match up against Golden State a little bit better than the other 2 teams.
The size factor with Jokic, where you just don't really
Exactly.
have like, another big body to cover him. I mean,
Exactly.
it's tough because again, the Butler factor makes things different now. Where because the idea between a Golden State Nuggets matchup historically was always like, well, Steph can draw a guy like Jokic away from the basket, and that creates extra looks for guys around the basket. For the other Warriors
Mhm.
players, it was just they didn't have the second guy, and now they do. I guess the other factor would be like which series would be the most likely scenario where he could be the best player because you would probably need that in order to win a series, especially against the higher seed.
Yeah.
And it probably would be a little bit less like not impossible, but a little less likely that Steph would be outplaying Jokic in a series. They're different positions, so different responsibilities. But I think that one would be a taller task. But I
Yep.
think he could definitely outplay Ja if Ja
That's
can't
my
get,
point.
yeah, especially if he can't get back to the level he was at, in previous seasons. And then with OKC, well, the main concern isn't really SGA. It's kind of everyone else, right? So there's at least a scenario where like maybe those 2 guys play to a draw, but then like the next 2 or 3 guys are Golden State guys that just outplay
Yeah,
some of the
especially if
like
Jimmy erupts in the first round.
right.
Holy crap. That could be really bad for Oklahoma City.
Yeah, but it's just, but again, for Golden State, ideally they want to get out of the play-in. So if they get out of the play-in, then it's probably going to be either Memphis or Denver. That play. Well, if they're out of the play-in, then it would be whoever the 3 seed is. So yeah, either Memphis or Denver. Maybe Lakers if they climb up to 3. Who knows, right? I guess because that would be the main thing is like because from 2 to 5, they're only a couple losses apart. But some of those teams' schedules are a lot more difficult. So, like I said, the Lakers' schedule is very difficult, but they have been playing really well. So maybe there's a world where they can get to a top 3 seed. I just feel like to probably get out of the conference and probably win it all, you still got to be a top, 5 seed, I think, at the very least. I just think it's probably tough because I just think I think OKC, I don't know. Like, of course, there's a world where they could lose, but and it feels scarier now, but I don't know. I still feel good about their chances of not going out early, right? Like, I mean, I still feel like conference finals for them should be pretty doable, but
Yeah, I
maybe
agree.
not. Right. And then Moving on, a team that has gone in the complete opposite direction is the Phoenix Suns, right? Where they're 2-8 in their last 10, and it's just gotten bleaker and bleaker and bleaker for them. Where where it's just kind of wild how completely opposite in the direction that team has gone since the beginning part of the season, where they did look really good, right? And it's bizarre, right? Because you've Beal's back in the starting lineup. He seems like he's been playing better, right? You have Durant and Booker, right? Durant's been playing pretty well, but the problems continue where it's like they can't defend, they can't rebound, they turn the ball over, and it's just wild how they overhauled the coaching staff. They made quote unquote some roster improvements, but it seems like this team is worse. Right now, you have the issue of it seems like guys know this is done. I mean, we're already getting reports about Durant will probably be moved regardless of whether or not it's his decision, which he probably wants out at this point anyway. So you can probably kind of figure out the guys will probably not that they're going to quit, just throw in the towel, but I think the incentive to really do whatever it takes to win the rest of the way probably gone at this point. And, where do the Suns go from here? Because at this point now it's looking pretty bleak compared to what it looked like the first 10 or so games of the season.
Yeah, I don't know. This is probably the biggest disappointment I think this season. Obviously,
Mhm.
at first you kind of really at this point run out of excuses for their team, right? Because the first excuse was, okay, well they don't have Durant. Then it was like, okay, well now all three guys are in and out of the starting lineup, and you kind of saw things kind of repeating from last year. Granted, they were still kind of winning and still in the race, but now I think they've completely fallen off. Even though the three guys are playing okay, it's just not consistent enough. I think at this point in this league, you definitely need to have a defense and an offense. If you want to have a chance at even making the playoffs, to be honest. And they clearly don't have the personnel on the team. They have some good pieces, that I think we did like, but we just didn't believe that they could win a title. I didn't think it would be this bad. Like everybody was kind of salivating over the Tyus Jones move, which I mean we kind of liked, but we didn't
Yeah.
put them as like a uber contender because they
We
finally
didn't
got a
like it.
point guard.
We didn't like as much as others only because we liked it but we didn't think he should be a starter. And,
Exactly.
now he's not, by the way, funny enough. It just
Yeah.
only took him like 60 games or whatever.
Because, it's funny, like that. And the first excuse last year, last year's playoffs was, oh, well, they don't have a point guard. You were playing Beal or Book at the one, which, I mean, Booker was doing pretty well, but, you ideally would want a table setter, and they got that. And look where that got them. Absolutely nowhere. Now you don't have a center, and I just don't really know what you do. I've heard people talking about Book leaving. I doubt that. I think it's Durant probably just because they shopped him at the deadline. I think that only sounds right with all the reports that Windhorse has given us. So, I don't know what they do post
Mhm.
Durant because I mean you kind of ideally would hope for, a solid return that still makes you a contender, but I'm gonna rewind the clock a little bit even further, like before they even got Beal, I think people were super high on that team
Mhm.
until, Durant, I think it was, he got injured in the warm-ups or whatever, right? And
Right?
it's like that kind of is where it all really spiraled,
They went
Um,
into the playoffs,
they went
and
to the
then they
playoffs. DeAndre
beat the
Ayton was
Clippers.
inconsistent. Chris Paul looks, a step slow or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. They beat the Clippers, but it was kind of like a 5 game. It was a 5 game series, but they didn't look as dominant as you would have liked, right? Most
Right.
of those games kind of. Then they played the Nuggets, lost the first 2 games. Then they had the 2 games where Booker went off. Booker and Durant had to combine, 90,000 points or whatever. And then they lost in game 6, right? Because some of the guys got hurt. Then they made the big Beal deal, right? Where it was like, they didn't give up. I mean, it was like Chris Paul. So it's not like they gave up a ton. But then you double down on it with the Aiton thing, where that just was bad, right? Where it's like you got
Agreed.
back, Nurkic, who was, I guess, fine for them last year, but not in the playoffs. But then this year he was just horrible. And then Grayson Allen, who again is a solid player, but just I mean, and Aiden's not really been that good anyways, right? Since he's been moved from the Suns. But it's just the fact that you sold low on a guy who at one point was a pretty good asset, right? And then, you got back on the guy in Beal who doesn't fit. So it's just, it's gonna go now down as probably one of the worst big threes, right, that we've seen, right?
Agreed.
After we had seen the previous big three with Durant and Harden and Kyrie, where that looked really good until they got hurt, right? But
Yeah.
now, now they're a part of the big three that was horrible. Even though,
Hmm.
like, it really shouldn't be considered a big three, but I understand from the perspective Beal had the great numbers in Washington, but just
Yeah.
it's just tough, right? Because the team was on a pretty good momentum. It seemed like they were on track to get better each year, right? Where they went to the finals, then they had the 60+ win season that ended horribly for them in the
Yeah.
playoffs
The
against
yeah.
the Mavs. And then, they did the Durant deal halfway through the season. Like you said, people liked it, thought they'd be a contender, but then they lost to the Nuggets, but there's not as much shame in that because they got to the second round,
Yeah.
lost in six, got banged up against the event defending champs. But then last year happened, and that was just bad. And now they followed it up with this year, and it's even worse. My question is, where does Durant go?
Mm.
Because like if you're the Suns, I don't think you're gonna get much back for him, mainly because of the fact that he does his contract. He doesn't have too many seasons left, right? He's got like what 1 year left after this.
Hmm. Hmm.
So even beyond the age factor, but if it could be another Butler type situation where not that he's going to do the same stuff that Butler did, but just a guy in the last year of his deal gets moved somewhere else and then maybe gets one last extension for whatever his next team is. It's just a matter of where does he go? Because I mean, I guess in theory with the Luka deal, he could go anywhere, but which teams make the most sense? I know Dallas was talked about after the Luca deal, right, where they talked about like, oh, maybe we, go get Kevin Durant out of Phoenix, right? And I think the other team aside from Phoenix when Durant first asked out of Brooklyn was Miami, but that's a different situation now. That doesn't make as much sense for him at this point. But yeah, where do you like, since he's obviously your favorite player, but like so in
Yeah.
terms of what you would think for him, where do you think at this point, if not Phoenix, where's the best case or best place for him to go? Because it seemed like he didn't want to go to Golden State, and now that's off the table anyways because they got Jimmy.
Yeah, it's tough. I've heard some crazy, ideas that I don't agree with. Like I've heard San Antonio, I don't think that works. I've heard Houston. I think that probably had more steam in previous years,
Mhm.
and probably earlier in the season, but I feel like that will probably have died down. I do like the Grizzlies one. I think that one is kind of intriguing because I think they could offer up maybe, a package that Phoenix would probably feel like they, comfortable where it's like it's not a complete loss, you know what I mean? Um and then I think the other one that's kind of been interesting, I know they freaking shot from half court basically at the deadline, but Minnesota, I think that one is interesting cuz do you think that they would be able to do that? Do you think they would be able to pull something off like that?
I guess that maybe that's like Randall plus stuff. I don't know what that
That's what
other
I'm
stuff
thinking.
would be, because I mean, with the way that some of those guys have been playing, it doesn't make as much sense, I think to keep Randall beyond the season because
Agreed.
I mean, they've been playing better without him on. I mean, I know they've been playing 500 recently, but like it feels like since he's been out, they've actually found some stuff where like McDaniels has been better, like Nas Reed as a starter just because he can shoot fits better,
Heck yeah.
right? Even Enzo hasn't even come back, so it's like I mean, they don't really need him. He just even though he's a good player that puts up good numbers, it's hard for him to fit on a lot of teams, and it just seems like they don't need him. So, but they would have to probably add additional players because his salary alone doesn't add up,
Yeah.
right? And I think because they're both second apron teams, they'd have to basically get the salaries to match exactly, unless there's maybe like I don't know a multi-team deal in there. Maybe I don't know, but that would be kind of the tough part there, right? Where
Cuz what I'm
I
thinking
know.
is I'm thinking they use the first round pick that they got in the
Mhm.
draft or via the the cat trade or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then you'd probably want to re-sign Nasri because I think he's played really well this season. I think you
Hmm.
probably want to re-sign Nikhil. Um, but I feel like you throw in that pick and Randall or something because I think Nasri is gonna opt out. So I mean I don't know. Like that, I feel like
Right.
they're gonna
Like,
have to use that.
yeah. Like, I guess, like, could it be? Because, like, the thing is, with them being a second apron team, I'm not sure if they can. I don't think they can aggregate salaries. Maybe it might be easier in the off season, but could it be something like Randall, Conley, and, like I said, other stuff? I just don't know how feasible that is,
Do you
right?
think
Like,
they trade Gobert?
I think they just extended him, right? So, I mean, if they just extended him, probably not at this point. But that's it's tough. But that's something that I would kind of think about, just from the
What
perspective of
about
I think,
Jaden
you know
McDaniels?
I mean, it's possible because, I mean, again, like, I, I mean, I would say Edwards would be really the only, like, quote unquote untouchable
Agreed.
piece, but I don't necessarily know. I guess, like, I just don't know what the appetite is for putting together that package. Like,
Hmm.
I just, it's kind of tough to figure that one out, just because we haven't heard as much. I mean, the difference is now that the ownership has changed, maybe there might be more. It might be easier to go in a different direction where they can be like, all right, now let's go out and get a different person, right? It's the new owner thing where they're just like, all right, let's go out and let's go get KD. Maybe it would be tough. Like I said, I feel like he's definitely gone. I just don't really know where he goes because I think there'll still be a bidding war because it's not like he's not talented. He's still an awesome player. It's just, he may, given his contract, it's going to have to be a situation where it's probably only going to be certain teams. It's not going to be a scenario where, every team, like, I don't think the Detroit Pistons are going to, inquire about him. Not that they, couldn't, quote unquote, benefit from him, but, I don't think they would do that. That would be a team that would be more so, like I said, like some of these other teams where
Yeah.
maybe they could talk themselves in, like, because, like, Minnesota already has their franchise player. Now it's about finding the pieces around him.
Hmm.
Whereas, like, with Houston, I don't know what they do, but if I were them, I would be, if I'm gonna make a trade to bring in a star, I would want that guy to be able to probably be my franchise player. And I
Exactly.
don't necessarily want it to be 37-year-old Durant, even though he's still
Exactly.
really. So,
Yeah.
with that, but the Minnesota one is one to keep in mind because, like you said, I remember Shams mentioned that that was kind of a Hail Mary team
Hmm.
that was mentioned.
Yep.
Yeah. Then we move on to the East. We have a really good story going on where the Detroit Pistons, right? They're now the sixth seed. They've won 8 in a row, 8 of their last 10, including a blowout win over the Boston Celtics, right? Where, Cade Cunningham continues to play at a amazing level where he might have played himself into the All NBA conversation. And we talked about the idea of adding shooters, adding veteran talent to this group, where the Pistons, they were bad anyways, but they were really bad in terms of no shooting or floor spacing last year, right? And in previous seasons. But now you have guys like Malik Beasley, who's had his best year in the NBA, basically, right? Other guys like Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr. that can get hot, that have been in situations before, and it's a regular season team, so you're not as worried about the craziness that, or the volatility that they might bring come playoff time. And they're now in a spot where they're pretty comfortably out of the play-in right now, right? Like, they're 4.5 games ahead of the Magic, right? They just lost to Golden State, right? So they're in a spot where, they could even potentially go up a little bit because they're only a loss or two behind the Pacers and the Bucks, right? Who've also been playing well in their own right. And, it's just kind of crazy where it's just, but in a good way. Cause I think we were high on the Pistons in regards to, we thought they would be better. I don't think we thought that they would be like just a playoff team, right? Where, like, now they're pretty solidly in the playoff picture. They're probably finished above 500 now at this point, unless they just completely collapse over the rest of the way. I mean, they're 7 games ahead of above 500 right now with, what, like 20 something odd games to go. So just, it's a great thing to see because, again, they've completely turned it around where they looked like a dumpster fire, a year ago. And people were kind of questioning, whether or not Cade could be a franchise guy. And now his game's gone up another level. And again, like I think he could be in the I think he can be in the all NBA mix.
Yeah, for sure. I think what Detroit is doing is super special. Like we said in the short, it starts with Cade, obviously, but I think you do really have to give credit to the coaching staff and what they've done. They've completely changed the identity of the team alongside, the very good development and very good drafting, I would say, of the organization, because a lot of those young guys are starting to really, pan out, and you're kind of really you're really starting to see, them reap the benefits. And I think that's really amazing, considering all that this franchise has been through. But, guys like Asar Thompson, Duran, Ivy before he got hurt,
Mm-hmm.
even like a guy like Ron Holland. I mean, like some people were low on that pick, but, he's been playing pretty solid minutes. And obviously the veterans are making their great contributions. And I think that's what it's all about. That's how a team is supposed to be built, especially when they're young, and their franchise guy is super young as well. And he's been, taking leaps and steps forward every single season. So it was kind of a matter of time on this one. And I'm glad, he proved the doubters like me wrong, because I didn't think he had, these kinds of numbers in him, at least this early, maybe a little bit down the line. I thought he might have been more of a late bloomer kind of guy than, third, fourth year, all NBA looking kind of guy. So, props to him. And I think, he's proving why he should have been and was drafted number one. He's definitely, one of those guys, and the record speaks for itself. And he said it, pre All-Star break, like they were gunning for that 6 seed, and, they've got it right now.
Yeah. His last 10 games, 28 points a game, 10 assists, six
It's crazy.
rebounds, right? 47 from the field, 38 from three, right?
Crazy.
So just, again, like just
Big
crazy
guard.
numbers. Yeah, from this guy. So all NBA thoughts, like in terms of like, do you think he's going to get there? Like, do you think he's going to get on that spot, get in that mix? Because, we have a few guys who probably would be there normally, but obviously now they're going to get shut out because of injuries, right? Like Luka's out. Embiid was already out anyways, and he wasn't on there last year. And then Wemby, right, would have been on there, but he's out, right? And now we're kind of on Giannis watch, right? Where I think if he misses like 5 or 6 more games, he could be out. But for now, he's still in there. But could he? Do you think Cade should be in that All NBA mix?
Yeah, I think so, 100%. Look at the record, look at the numbers, look at the impact. It's all there. The efficiency has
Right.
gone up every year. And I'm not saying, this is the peak and this is as good as he's going to get, but this is the best he's ever been. His impact and what he can do. Obviously, the turnovers are high, but I think that tells me that he's not afraid to take risks, and he's not afraid. It's kind of like how a quarterback in the NFL, like, you would never draft a quarterback that never throws interceptions in college, because that means they're only making the safe play. So I think I do like a lot of what I've seen from Cade. Actually, I love a lot that I've seen from him, and I think he deserves the nod. Look at the stats. Look at his style of play. He's a big guard, and it's straight skill. It's not. I know that the narrative of foul baiting has been going around a lot, but this guy is doing it off of straight skill and strength. You know what I mean? And he's a big guard, smooth playmaker. He's really a do it all kind of guy, and I think that's as good as you're gonna get, honestly.
Ethical hooping is what they're calling it.
Yeah, ethical hooping, no foul baiting and flopping. That's funny.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's the thing. So, because, like, when you look at the guards in All NBA, right, you're going to have SGA for sure,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think, you're going to have, probably some of the other guys, right? Like, my guess is Mitchell will probably be there because of the Cavs
Mm-hmm.
record, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether or not he's going to be first or second, but he'll be there. Brunson will be there for sure, right? So, those are already 3 guards. Then, you move down the list, right? And it's probably going to be some combination of, like, I guess Edwards will be there, right? It seems like Steph has now kind of played his way into that list, and he probably would have been in there anyways. But I think if he continues the way he's been playing, he'll be on that list. And then after that, then you got to factor in, like Cade should already be there anyways, right? Because he's been better, than some of the other guys anyways.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, yeah, like he had been playing better anyways than I think some of the names that I had mentioned, but. So that's where I think he should be in there. But it wouldn't surprise me if something at the last minute changes. But with the way he's played, he's definitely got the All NBA nod
Yeah,
for
for
sure.
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like just he like the way he's played is one of the main reasons, in addition to all the other stuff, why Detroit has played above and beyond what we would have expected. Because we had the over on them, and we thought they'd be a playing team, but not like a solid playoff team. Where like now, like I said, they're probably going to finish with a winning record,
Yeah.
and they're going to play presumably whoever finishes as the 3 seed in the first round if they can hang there if they don't climb right
Yeah.
just with the way that these the standings race has been going, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you move on down to a sad story in the East, and that's the Philadelphia 76ers, right? They are 20-38, so nearly 20 games below 500. They've lost 9 in a row, 1 of 9 in their last 10. Now it sounds like Embiid has been playing with injections for most of the season. Not in a but like in the way where it's like it's because he's been playing through a lot of pain, unfortunately, right? Paul George, I think similar situation, just in his fingers or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Right now they're in the spot where Eric Gordon's season is over. He was bad for them anyways. Gorshan Yabusele, I think, had both of his eyes poked, so I think he's out for now, but they don't know how serious it is. We don't know. Drummond stunk. Paul George has stunk, right? So that's kind of the big issue is that and I know he's had a few okay games recently, but like he on the whole, he's been bad this year, right? In a way where they would have been way better even with the Embiid injuries if he played anything close to what he was doing last year, right? Where he was really good last year. He's an all-star, right? Basically, right? And wasn't he an all-star last season, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So just everything that could go wrong for them went wrong. And this was a team where their over under was so tough, right? Where it's like you had I think we did over only from the perspective of I think we at least thought that even if Embiid misses time, Maxi and George could still probably figure some stuff out. And Maxi's played very well, right? So that he's not really been a problem. They've gotten some good games out of Oubre. Yabusele has been great, but pretty much everyone else has been McCain before he got hurt was awesome, but everyone else has been like just an absolute dud or just a complete lesser version of themselves. And some of that you just chalk up to injury. Like Embiid's been banged up anyway, so there's nothing you can really do about that. But now they're in a spot where the ideal thing is for them to tank and just try to get that draft pick. I don't know what they're gonna do. They are just losing anyway, so like they may just lose enough games to where it doesn't even really matter. But does it really get better next season? I guess hopefully they get, for their sake, a top 6 pick. If they don't, right, and it's like 7 or lower, then that's just going to be absolutely brutal. But even then, you're still going to have to hope and pray that those guys can get through a healthy season. I don't think George's contract is tradable, right? Embiid, what does he continue to look like as we're going along? I don't know, just because he's already past the point of 30 years old, right? So this is bad. This is a really horrible situation for the Sixers where I don't really know how they get out of this one, right? Like, at least for the Suns, you could argue there's a way out just by moving on from everybody. It would still be horrible because they don't have their picks, but at least you could, in theory, just kind of pull the plug. But you can't really do that if you're Philly. And you're not going to get back anything for any of those guys, anyways, right? Like, so let's say they trade Paul George. This isn't 2K where you could just trade him for maybe decent players, right? That nobody's taking on that contract because it's a long-term contract on a player who looks like he's just going to get worse from year to year. So,
Yeah.
just like I said, pretty much all bad from their perspective, and I don't really know where you go from here.
Yeah. We definitely picked the over for sure, and
Yeah,
I think they were projected
yeah.
to win 50 games, and
Right.
going
We
into the
bailed on them
season.
early though. Once they started the season off as horribly as they did, we were out. I think we literally said like we're done because some people were holding out. We were like, no, we're writing them off.
Yeah, and it's like on paper you really like it, but then you start to dig, the circumstances, who's on the roster, the injury concerns, and that's the biggest thing. But I think the number one dud for sure is Paul George because of the amount of money that you spent. Obviously, top free agent in the class, and that's what we said when they first signed him. Like you applaud the fact that you got the top free agent in the class, but at the same time, it's a big risk, and it's been blown up in their face, pretty much from the start. He hasn't done his job, which was to somewhat stop the bleeding when, said Embiid goes down, and it was supposed to be Tyrese Maxey and Paul George, kind of keeping the team afloat. But then pretty much from opening week, we didn't see a good version of Paul George at all. We didn't even get to see Embiid for a while. And, at first it was more so Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain, carrying the way and stuff like that. Then Maxey had his fair share of injury concerns, and, the usage rate has been crazy because he's literally been carrying the offense. So, it's just been all around struggles. I think when the saving grace is that you signed Yabusele and he's been balling out on a veteran, minimum.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. I think that means you had a pretty crappy season, and that's no shot at Yabusele because he's been amazing. But the fact that a minimum contract guy is the highlight of your season, come on, what are we doing? Like, and the fact that I don't know why they continue to do this. If Embiid is hurt, shut him down. Let him recover. Let the man rest, because we already know what he looks like when he plays banged up. He's not remotely the same player. There's no point in that. It's a waste of a season anyway. So why even jeopardize, what little future that you do have and that player's future as well, And that's what I don't understand. And I never really got behind fully with the logic of bringing in a guy like Paul George, because I believe, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe what our logic was, yes, on paper, the team can win 50 games. Do we think they're a title contender? Do we think that they'll go deep in the playoffs? Probably not, because of injury concerns. We said the same thing about Charlotte, where we liked a lot that the Hornets had on the roster, but we already knew what was going to happen. Granted, we picked the under, I think, for them or whatever, but I don't know. So, a little bit of a difference there, but at the end of the day, same logic, and lo and behold, look at where we are.
Yeah. The spreadsheet. Yeah, the spreadsheet. That's what we did. So, it's just tough because again, like there's not a whole lot you can really do at this point if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, where, like you said, the best thing for them to do is, like you said, shut it down. Season's a wash. I know Paul George said that he's ending or suspending his podcast for now, right, to turn it up so they can make a play and push. I don't know why that wasn't just done earlier in the season, but Either way, yeah, like that's the other thing. Like for him, it's not just the play; it's also just the other stuff on top of it. Where it's like he had the quote where it was like, "I get kind of what was it? It was like that he gets bored playing center for the Sixers."
Yeah, right? What, bro?
Yeah, we're like the best thing to say would have just been, it's not the most ideal situation, but I'm willing to do, whatever the team needs. Because again, that's why they're paying you $200+ million.
Dude, where's the PR training? And then to make false promises, like he's like, I'm on bully mode or whatever. Right, bully mode. 2 points,
and it's funny because like the Clippers won at this point, right? Where they, because pretty much everybody, including ourselves, thought that it was insane that they did that. And now again, they're still kind of in a spot where like they're all right. Like I think they're starting to kind of slip. Part of that is some injuries, like Norman Powell, I think, has been out. He's been, one of their best players this season, right? But maybe for them, they're a little bit older, so it could just be the mojo's just starting to run out. But either way, they're just in a way better spot because they're not financially tethered, to the max contracts of two guys who are never available. Now it's just one, right? So, but that guy is a better player when he's 100%. Healthy.
Yeah.
But still, it's awful for the Sixers. And that's the thing is like the Suns are definitely, I think, like where you separate the Suns and the Sixers is like the Sixers have been horrible, but at least you can primarily say like everything has gone wrong. Like the injuries, like guys have barely played. That's a big part of it. Whereas with Phoenix, they just suck. Like that's kind of like how it goes, for them, where it's like they haven't even had that. I know some of their role players have been in and out, but like their big three has been relatively available, I guess, aside from Beal. But just either way, yeah. Just which team? So, do you think that you'd rather be the Suns though, or would you rather be the Sixers? Like, which team has it worse? I guess is what you think.
I think hmm, I don't know. I feel like Philly has it worse because
Okay.
you went out, you tried to do a big splash,
Hmm.
brought in Paul George, then everybody gets hurt, like including your draft pick. Like that hurts as well. Um, with Phoenix, like you said, I think there's 100% a way out. I don't think there's a way out of the Beals thing because of the no trade clause, but
Right.
getting rid of KD and maybe bringing in like a defensive center, because I think the cool thing is about Phoenix is we already know that Book can be pretty lethal by himself or with another duo like a Beal. I think those two could be lethal, not title lethal, but at least probably the latter end of the playoff, spectrum kind of thing, like eighth seed and up. So
Hmm.
I think that's fine as long as you bring in, some personnel that can help you, potentially get over that hump a little bit and, go back to, some defensive routes and stuff like that, and get a physical screen setting big. I think you can do that. But with Philly, you're stuck with PG. You're also not, I don't want to say stuck with Embiid because we already know how good he can be, but you always have the risk of injury with him. Does Jared McCain come back the same? Does Tyrese Maxey, has he been capped out? I think there's more questions with Philly, and I feel like the vibes are lower probably for Philly at the moment.
Hmm. Yeah. I
What?
guess I no. It was just I was just looking at we're gonna eventually read read a comment, but
Yes.
either way, yeah. Like I think it is tough because it's just like the Sixers have a significantly worse record, but for them, I think it's gonna be harder for them to get out of it because you can't move anybody, right? At
Mm-hmm.
least like you said with the Suns, they don't have a future either, but at least they could just blow it up,
Yeah.
which it feels like it's at least heading there with Durant, just because it seems like because it just seems like their personal situation as well, like where those guys don't really want to be there. And again, it's bad.
Yeah.
So we'll see where things go from there. I guess we do have a comment from Damiano Ciafardi, right? And it says, "Thank God Steph has help. God bless you." Right. So this is something that we talked about obviously earlier in the podcast, right? Where this is from that Warrior short that we put out recently, where yeah, now that he is a co-star, right now he can. Now he doesn't. It's not all on him, right? Like you're gonna have games like the Magic game where yeah, he's got to just go off and just have 50 or whatever. But now the way you guard this team is different with Jimmy Butler because now you can't just be like, we don't care about any of the role players at all. We're just gonna take turns just making sure that anyone but Steph goes off. Well, you can't do that now because now you have a proven guy in Jimmy Butler who again is super motivated and wants to win, with this team, right? So it's completely changed their fortunes.
Yeah, and that comment had, a decent amount of likes, so people really did agree with that, obviously. And, that's kind of been the sentiment around the Jimmy Butler trade. More so, when it first happened, I was like, I'm kind of not really high on the whole desperation thing. Like, this seems like a move where, all right, well, let's go get him. You know what I mean? More so than like, oh my gosh, we just got a Jimmy Butler. But yeah, through the first, few games that we've seen, with Jimmy on the team, I think it's been amazing. Like you said, he's been taking off a ton of pressure for Steph, allowing him to create opportunities, allowing the team as a whole to create more opportunities. And it gives you a different look because we haven't seen it in a long, long time. Like even with the 2022 Warriors team, you had, not necessarily like another star, but you had some real threats. You know what I mean? And I think that was the issue. Since then
Yeah,
they
like you
hadn't
had
had a threat.
right, like because at least like Jordan Poole, like and nobody's saying he's like a superstar, but he
Yeah.
was a guy that you could actually give the ball to and have him, go through some offensive possessions where
Wiggins.
like yeah, exactly. Yeah, even Wiggins was better at that point. I mean, Steph was also better, so that was part of
Yeah.
it. But the big factor is the
It was a
additional.
team.
Yeah, it was, but yeah, it was a better team, and it was just the additional perimeter ball handling
Yes.
threats that they had out there. Because, like I
Yeah.
said, a guy like a Jordan Poole could go off and have a 20-point, game or like a 15-point quarter or something like that,
Yes.
where Steph could either be on the bench or he could be out there and just be able to take some possessions off. It's the same thing we talked about, like I said, with the Lakers with LeBron and Luca, where
Mm-hmm.
you have a guy now where LeBron can take possessions off offensively because he has a guy that can just go one-on-one or play in the pick and roll. We haven't even seen a lot of plays where they're doing stuff together, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like LeBron screening for Luka or vice versa. We haven't even seen much of that. But just it's the same thing where it's like with these guys, if you can give them another additional type of creator guy, and this is the stuff these guys have been talking about for, because even like LeBron going back several seasons, right? That's why they've gone after guys like Dennis Schroeder or D'Angelo Russell, or now they've been elevating Austin Reeves because he's talked about many times, like he's told the team, and the team has recognized it, like you need an additional creator, because you can't ask LeBron over the course of an 82 game season to do the heavy lifting. And it's the same thing in Golden State. Although that one was just more obvious because you didn't even really have that right after they got rid of Poole, right? They tried to kind of sort of make up for it with Chris Paul, but he just wasn't really quite at that level, right? Like he could run your offense, but they needed more somebody who was a little bit more dangerous as a scorer. And now they got that guy. And again, he wasn't even really good in this Orlando game, but he didn't have to be, right? Because just him being out there, you have to guard him in a way that you didn't have to guard other guys.
Yeah.
And he can work outside the Golden State system too. Again, we talked
Mm-hmm.
about that
Yeah.
earlier in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the Off Ball Takes podcast. Again, we appreciate all the comments and support that we're getting, with these videos, right? And every time somebody leaves a comment, we'll read it, at the end of this episode. Obviously, continue to like and subscribe, right? Because obviously, if you like the videos, they'll show up more. And if you subscribe, that will help our channel grow and get to where we want to go and reach our goals, right? So we'll see you in the next episode, and we'll continue to see how this NBA season unfolds.